a patent from KTM where they've decided that it's a good idea, Tim, to have on-bike sound monitors to measure basically the amount of sound that your bike's putting out. Now, we've got to keep in mind as well that like sound restrictions are getting stricter and stricter, and especially in countries, I believe, like Austria, which is, of course, where KTM is based. So maybe it's more of a pressing concern to them and more front of mind. So this has led to products like Jekyll and Hyde with the exhaust system with a valve in it where you can press a button on the handlebars and quieten it down for certain scenarios, let's say. Maybe you're being tested. But also this idea here that with an 80 decibel limit, they would have sensors dotted around the bike which would help to keep you below it. And I believe from reading this article on Cycle World that the justification for it goes along these lines, that if you have a speedometer to monitor your speed in order to comply with the law, then why wouldn't you have a sound meter with a similar needle, let's say, to help you make sure that you're complying with the law in that regard, especially if you come across the audio equivalent, let's say, of a speed camera. And there's even, mate, some very simple illustrations in the article of a speedo for noise.
I'm glad they put that on there. I mean, I wouldn't, without seeing a circle with a line on it, I really would have struggled to understand what they're getting at.
I don't know what you think of this one, mate. We've seen some pretty interesting patterns over the last few months of doing this show. But this is probably one of the more surprising ones. I don't know. Would you buy a bike with something like this on it?
It wouldn't put me off, put it that way. But how much attention I would pay to it is, I'm not even going to say it's questionable. I know how much attention I pay to that. 0 until I was passing one of those sound enforcing cameras. But the problem with that is that, you know, if you want to, the safest possible way of you riding is watching the frickin' road where you're actually going, not glancing down at the speedo constantly because you're worried about setting off a camera if you're in like a 20-mile-an-hour zone around here, or glancing down at your audio decibel meter because you're worried about getting a fine because your bike's too loud, right? It is one of the things that absolutely infuriates me about the kind of restrictions that they keep bringing in year on year. So that's how I feel about it. How about you?
I get what you're saying, although it was interesting to hear you say I'd pay no attention at all until I came to a speed camera or like a sound testing, camera or whatever it would be. Because it obviously would be super useful in that particular moment. But what I think is interesting is it puts the onus on the rider and not the manufacturer, which initially I'm against. It's probably, I feel like it's their responsibility to make a bike that complies with the law all the time. But then, really thinking about it, the speedometer comparison or parallel that they've made is probably a good one, because you could argue they make bikes that can do 150 miles an hour and beyond, but they're not saying you should do that. And so you've got a needle in a circle to tell you when you go past the speed camera specifically, but also ideally all the time, whether you're going too quick or not. And the sound is just possibly another part of that, I suppose. You could argue if it's really loud in the upper rev range, maybe that's just for track use, and that actually they expect you to ride it more gently on the road in the same way that they expect you to do that with regards to the power. And so it's then on you as the rider to keep the revs low by short shifting or whatever to comply with the law on the road. I don't know how I feel about that, mate. Whose responsibility is that?
Well, exactly. I mean, but similar with the sort of Jekyll and Hyde exhaust, right, is that they're giving you a way to fudge the test, if anything, right? They're finding a loophole that you can exploit if you want a loud exhaust still. So that's kind of one of their focuses with it. And it's a similar kind of method. And I understand the logic behind it, but I can't deny that it is triggering to me, mainly because it's the same reasons I get triggered by the kind of, like I say, 20-mile-an-hour zones or stuff like that I don't necessarily agree with in their entirety, at least in certain specific circumstances. But either way, it's a very long debate and kind of irritating, but it just feels like penalising people unnecessarily and also distracting them from trying to just ride. And London's distracting enough anyway. I don't need any more distractions.
I think it's going to be a controversial one. But yeah, let us know what you think in the comments below, anyone who's listening. We'd love to know your take on it.